So today I've returned to that site in the woods where I cut my finger while I was working on making a bucksaw. And I found the pieces of wood that I was working on at the time. I decided to finish the project. Complete, functional, working, and just the way it was intended to be. So why don't you give me a minute, I'll take this apart and I'll show you how it goes back together, and I'll show you the lessons I learned on how to make a bucksaw and how not to cut yourself. Stay tuned. Okay, before I assemble the saw, I think it's important that I show you what I was doing when I cut myself, what I should have been doing, and how you can avoid making the same mistake that I made. So in my first attempt at making this saw out in the woods on the other side of the lake here, I had failed to trim this end of the stick, and I will give you some close-ups, but I had failed to thin out this end of the stick to make it easier for me to create the notches that need to meet the uprights on the saw. But I had done that here, and this is actually the piece of wood that I was cutting when I cut myself. So I had taken the time to thin the wood out as appropriate, working at a safe angle, pushing the knife away from me. And when I believed it was thin enough, that's when you start to create those notches. And there's a 90-degree notch that meant to mate up with the uprights that have a 90-degree angle built into those. So what I was doing at the time and was holding the stick close to my chest, and again I will give you a close-up, and I was pushing the knife in, not slicing, just straight pushing the knife in, working to create an ever widening, increasing notch at a 90-degree angle. Now that's how I should have been doing it. What in fact happened was the glasses had slipped off of my face. Somebody pointed out to me recently that they saw me putting my glasses on with my knife in my hand, and they're absolutely right. It's a practice. When I see myself doing it, it makes me cringe. So I'm consciously trying to get away from it. And the knife is always pointed away from my face. It's not as dangerous as it looks. Still, it's a good practice to get into. Don't put your glasses on with the knife, the hand you're holding the knife with. So the knife, in the situation where I had cut myself, the glasses had slipped from my face, and I need those for seeing up close, so I wasn't seeing as closely as I should have been, and I was also slicing with the knife, trying to use more of the edge to cut with. And of course, I had mentioned before in the video where I talked about the cut, I had failed to notice that the belly of the knife was starting to get dull. So those things combined led to a point where I was sliding with the knife, and the knife literally just went right past the stick and down through my finger. That's how you don't do it. The correct way to do it is a sharp tool, being able to see with your glasses if you wear them, holding your hand so that they are touching your chest, limiting the movement, and simple push cuts. And that will give you the most control and the most efficiency in cutting the end of the stick. Now I'll just get a little closer and I'll show you again so that you can see what I was doing and what I should have been doing. All right, so here I have my stick with the 90-degree angle cut in it now, and my knife, which is quite sharp. I touched it up, of course, at home. Here's the way I should have been holding the knife at the time. Hands against my chest or my abdomen, and simply pushing in. The wood is quite dry now, and trust me, it was a lot easier to do when you're working with green wood. What I did do, in fact, was I was starting to slice, making up for the dullness of the edge of the knife. And that's when it went right past and through my finger. So there, that's out of the way, what not to do, and the proper way of doing it. Because quite honestly, this is probably the most hazardous portion, or the most hazardous task in putting this saw together. All right, let me get set up and I'll show you the saw being put together. Okay, I have the saw partially assembled, and I'll show you the reason why after I get it fully assembled. And I have the blade in the notches at the base of the uprights, and I have the 90-degree edges facing inwards, so they'll meet up with the 90-degree notches on each of the cross pieces. And I'm going to lay that in place now. Remember which one was designed to fit a little bit better than the other. There, that's right. I have two pieces of string that I pre-measured already. They're Axis bank line that I'm using today. Ideally, you want to use some form of cordage that doesn't have a lot of stretch. Paracord does have a fair amount of stretch. It can still work. You just have to anticipate that it's going to stretch, and you'll have to tighten it up more often than something that doesn't stretch. Bank line is nylon as well. I'm not sure how much stretch this will do, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I think this will work just fine. So I put the 2 cords on. As much as possible, I have one angled from the top of one upright towards the bottom of the other upright. And the same on the other side. The top of one upright to the bottom of the other upright, so that they are crisscrossed. And I'll explain that once the saw is assembled. And they're sitting a little bit loose right now. That's not unexpected. And I have 2 toggles that I'll use as windlass. One will go on each side. I could probably start with that a little tighter to begin with. I'll make up for that in the winding. Ideally, you would start with that a little tighter before you even start the windlass process. This takes quite a bit of tightening. I'll start that one. I'll get the other one started. Didn't give myself quite as much room as I did with the first one. Now, as I'm doing this, let me just explain a little bit about the design, and I'll talk more about that once it's fully assembled as well. But this is a saw that is designed basically by Morris Kahansky and assembled on video by his student and lead instructor, Kelly Harleton. I think there's a few improvements to the original design that Morris had that Kelly added. I think this, if I'm not mistaken, this crisscross assembly is one of those modifications. Now you can see, unlike a lot of other designs, the 2 windlass, they're not against the cross piece for support. They're actually using the ropes on both sides to support themselves. Now as I assemble this, I'm starting to see that it's getting a little bit out of alignment, but that is something, I think this might be a little bit big, that I should be able to address using my maul here. And that looks a bit better. All right, see if we can't get it a little bit tighter yet. Feels stable. Sure, it can use a little bit more tightening, but I think I'll go with that for now. Can always tighten it up a little bit more. Okay, I am going to show you this in the fully assembled position and point out a few of the design features that are rather special on this design. So stand by. All right, here it is, the fully assembled saw. Now I'm going to move in and let you see some of the details on this saw and show you what makes this saw so special. So one point I want to make, just in case either Kelly or Moores ever get to see this video, I didn't do all the finish work on it I could have. There could have been a lot more of the inner bark removed to make it a little bit more attractive. I certainly could have chamfered the corners all around. I certainly could have done a more fine detail all over, but it's functional as is. Interesting, when I first cut this piece of black spruce green, it was considerably heavier than it is now. I would say it's got to be a third, a quarter of the original weight. So, and I did anticipate that. It is interesting. So, you know, you think, why would I ever make a saw that heavy? It'll get lighter over time. All right, let me move in and show you some of the design features that make this special. So to begin with, the modification that I believe was Kelly Harleton was responsible for is this crossed over tightening line. And it's a matter of tightening it from 2 positions. It makes it much more stable. There is a theory in physics of triangles being the most stable form. And that's kind of what this is imitating, is using triangles. Now, one thing I could have done to this, I didn't do, and if I was going to keep the saw, I would probably do so, is I didn't make notches for the strings to ride in. That would have kept them from starting to slide down, as I was having an issue with that. So that would have been 4 notches, 2 on each side, and then that would have kept the strings from starting to slide. I also could have tightened the strings up a little bit more before I even put the 2 windlass toggles in. Now, design of this. What makes this different from other designs is not to say that other designs don't work and other designs are not effective. What makes this one different, though, is how the crosspiece meets the uprights. And I'll try and get in close so that you can see this. My glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. There is a 90-degree V formed on the upright, on the inward facing side. And you match that against, I think this is the better one to show you, a 90-degree V that is cut into the crosspiece. And what that allows is for maximum strength of your uprights. So you don't thin the uprights out, you don't put a hole through it, which may weaken it over time, but that gives you the full width of the stick from here to here. So you get all that strength. You've only removed a small portion of it in cutting those 2 V's. And yeah, it provides for a lot of strength. Now, I suppose there is one potential weakness, and that is right here in this area. There is a potential as the tension comes on that maybe start to open up and split a little bit. I see no evidence of that yet. I could do a whipping around the edge here, or even if I had some wire, I could tighten some wire, baling wire around there to prevent that from happening. If that does become an issue, I could always follow up with that. Okay, in the making of this saw, one of the things that you want to do is start with, yeah, this is a good one to show, the split on the bottom of the upright. And all I did was take my knife and baton in about 2 inches to create the opening that the saw blade would go in. You do that on both of your uprights. Now, why you do that first is you're going to actually insert the saw blade, that is, in the opening. You're going to visualize it from the top down, and that saw blade is going to give you a point of reference when you're cutting the 90-degree angle down the sides of the upright. So that's one tip that I did pick up from Kelly and aided a lot, because if the saw blade is out of line with the upright, you're going to get a twisting and bending in the saw, and eventually it's going to torque to a point where it probably won't be stable anymore and may come apart on you. So I have 2 bolts that I'm carrying now with when I take the saw blade out. They're mismatched nut and bolts so that it won't spin off. This has to be tightened up and then forced a little bit, and then it will stay on. Another thing I could have done is cut a notch right here to set that bolt in so it's less likely to slide. It's under tension right now. I don't think it's going anywhere, but if I wanted to be a little bit more particular, then I could create that notch as well. Okay, that's the design of the Morse Kohansky Kelly Harleton H Bucksaw. I notice now that my cross member needs to be batoned down a little bit on this side just to create an even opening on the throat. You don't want your cross member to start to slide one way or another. It will lead to instability and possibly failure over time. So I am going to tap that a little tighter. What it does also is it does force the whole assembly a little bit stronger, because I'm forcing it into a stronger position when I do that. So all that's left is to put this to the test. Will it cut wood? That was the whole point, wasn't it? All right, stand by while I set up to see how well this will cut some wood. Okay, at the risk of sounding like I'm making excuses before I even begin, the saw blade that I'm using is one that I picked up at Canadian Tire very inexpensively. I only picked it up just to try this project out. What I would do now, if I was going to do this project again, is order a proper saw blade, a good saw blade, maybe a Bucksaw. Now, those are not available in any of the stores locally that I know of, so I'd have to order it off of Amazon or somewhere else. But I think that's what I would do. But this, I think, will still be effective. How long it'll cut and how long it'll stay sharp, I don't know. But I think for the purpose of this test, it should work just fine. So using proper sawing technique, because if you've ever made this mistake, you'll understand why. There's a risk when you start your sawing that the saw will jump. A number of years ago I did exactly that, sawing up some firewood, and I have about 7 stitches. I sound accident prone, don't I? 7 stitches and a jagged cut right through the top of the knuckle. So if you're using a bucksaw, knowing that they will buck or jump, buck, that's not the reason I call it a bucksaw, of course, it's for bucking up wood. It's always a good practice to start by placing your hand through the throat, grabbing onto the other side, and then there's no way that you can have the blade jump and cut yourself. Once you get started though, and it's into the wood, you can certainly remove it, move your hand back a good distance. It's old maple, it's not really hard. That's good firewood, and that's the reason I'm cutting it. See, my blade is flexing ever so much, so I could use a little bit more tightening. Just the same, it is cutting. You'll notice on the last 2 cuts, I didn't put my hand through the throat like I said. I actually just moved it back a good distance. That also works, but the better practice is, especially if you're in tight quarters, to put your hand through the throat to start, and then move it out. Kind of a knot in the root that I'm hitting with this. All right, I think that's proof that the concept works. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. All right, let me close this video up with a few comments. So, I'm quite pleased with this. It worked out well. It certainly could use some refinement. This is the first time I've actually made one of these saws that it functioned the way it was intended to. My first attempt in that earlier video worked, didn't work well, and I immediately identified a number of issues and things I had done incorrectly. And I think I've corrected them in this saw. It's a functioning saw. But the question you might ask yourself is, why bother? I have a nice Trailblazer saw that's lightweight, fits inside of an aluminum tube, goes together well, cuts amazingly well. Why would I bother, going through the effort of making a saw like this with all the weight and all the time that it would take to make this, when I could carry the Trailblazer saw or any other number of saws? On my belt I'm carrying a Bucko, sorry, not a Bucko, a Silky Gone Boy. Well, it was more about developing my skills as a bushcrafter, learning to carve wood appropriately and to build tools that I could use in the woods. This is not something I would stop for a lunch, build this, cut the firewood that I would need, and then take this and go home with it or leave it where it is. It's something you might build at a camp. It does allow you to lighten your pack weight. If you're going to be somewhere for a few days and you want to lighten your pack weight, take just the blade or pack the blade into a survival kit. So if you ever do get separated from your equipment, such as on a canoe ride and your canoe gets overturned and you're now, and you have that survival equipment with you, with that saw blade with you on your person, you'll know how to create a saw that's functional, create enough firewood, create maybe even a shelter. Yeah, so that's the reason why. Okay, if you've enjoyed this video, you found it all entertaining, maybe learned a few things, maybe you'll consider subscribing to my channel. But in the meantime, get out and explore. Take that path less traveled. It will make all the difference. Bye for now.